My son brought me a calendar and said, "Mark how long you have left." I didn't say anything, but then she cut him out of her life, the first one. Stay with me until the very end to find out how the story ends. I look forward to your comments and thoughts on the story. They say words can't kill, but they've clearly never been handed a calendar by their only son. It was just after breakfast. The dishes were still warm in the sink, and the sun had only just begun to stretch across the kitchen tiles. I remember the smell of burnt toast and the soft clink of his coffee cup on the table. A regular morning, if not for what came next. He pulled something from his coat pocket and slid it across the table toward me. A glossy wall calendar, the kind with serene mountain views and inspirational quotes beneath each month. I thought it was a gift, maybe even a kind gesture. Then he said it. "Mark the days you have left, Mom. Might help you. Prioritize." He said it lightly, like a joke, with that half smile he always used when he wanted to be cruel without sounding it. My stomach went cold. I looked at the calendar, then at him, and I said nothing. Not a word, not a frown, not even a raised brow. Just silence. That's when he chuckled, patted the table twice like I was some pet he'd fed, and got up to leave. "Take care, all right?" he called behind him. "And don't forget to start with today." I didn't move until I heard the door close. For a long while, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the calendar like it might dissolve under my gaze. Each page, January through December, looked like a countdown, but not mine. No, that calendar wasn't about my time running out. It was the moment his time in my life ended. He thought he could measure me in days, in months left to breathe, in years past usefulness. He didn't know that I had measured every missed birthday he forgot, every Thanksgiving he skipped, every conversation that turned into a lecture about how I shouldn't be living alone. He brought a calendar. But I had already started making a different list. The people who still saw me, the moments that still mattered, the parts of my life I had left to live, not mark off like chores. And at the very top of the page, written in my mind in red ink, his name, crossed out. Because I may be old, but I'm not done. Not yet. The next morning, I pulled open the junk drawer in the hallway, the one everyone has, filled with expired coupons, loose batteries, and pens that don't work until you scribble circles. I found what I was looking for, a red pen, dried but not dead. I flipped open the calendar my son had left behind. January stared back at me with its polite blue snowcaps and a quote about time being precious. I didn't laugh. Instead, I crossed through January with one long, firm line, then February, then March. One by one, I marked through the months until I reached December, and I didn't stop. I wrote over the glossy photos, over the inspirational nonsense, over every neat little square that tried to box in my future. And then I wrote something at the bottom. I decide how my time is spent. I hung it back up. Not in the kitchen where he left it, but in the hallway where I passed it daily. A reminder, not of what he said, but of what I'd claimed for myself. That afternoon, I went for a walk through town. I bought myself flowers just because I wanted to see something blooming in my living room. I had lunch alone at a cafe where no one asked me why. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was disappearing. When I got home, I sat in my favorite chair, the one by the window with the worn armrest and faded cushion, and looked at the bouquet on my table. It was wild and messy, full of color, not perfect, but mine. That's when the phone rang. His name lit up on the screen. I stared at it, letting it ring once, twice, 5 times. Then I turned the phone face down and let the silence take it. There was nothing left to say. He had made his statement, loud, cruel, and clear. And I had made mine. He might not have heard it, but he would feel it in every unreturned call, every unopened message, every quiet season I lived without him in the picture. Because the calendar wasn't counting down my days anymore. It was counting up, toward a life he would no longer witness. Sundays used to mean something in this house. A roast in the oven, jazz on the radio, a fresh tablecloth folded over the dining table, even if no one was coming. I used to set out 2 teacups just in case, one for me, one for him, my son. He didn't always visit, but I kept the tradition anyway. Hope is funny like that. It clings, even when the person doesn't. But not anymore. After the calendar incident, I changed the rhythm of my Sundays. The teacups went back in the cabinet, the tablecloth stayed folded. I made soup instead of roast, simple, quiet meals, just for me. I thought it would make the loneliness louder. Strangely, it didn't. Instead, I started hearing something else, the sound of space, making room for peace. I began filling my Sundays with things I hadn't allowed myself in years. I took long walks in the neighborhood, even if my knees complained. I pulled out my old paints from the attic and set them up on the porch. I let the sun hit my skin without hurrying back inside. And I started writing again. Not for anyone else, just for me. Thoughts, memories, things I'd swallowed for decades. That third Sunday, while trimming my garden, I found the tin box I had buried years ago with my granddaughter. It was rusted at the corners, but still intact. Inside were slips of paper. Silly predictions, secret wishes, small jokes. One was from my son, written in boyish handwriting. "When I grow up, I'll take care of you, Mom." Promise I sat there, holding that note in dirt-covered gloves, letting the ache rise but not break me. That little boy, he had existed. He had once loved me freely, without calculation, without cruelty. But I wasn't holding that boy anymore. I was holding the echo of someone who no longer lived inside the man he became. And I realized something. I wasn't erasing the memory of him. I was erasing the power he thought he had over me. There's a difference. That Sunday, I put the box back. Not to forget, but to protect it from further harm. Then I brewed myself a cup of tea. Just one. I sat by the window as the afternoon light softened everything it touched. And for the first time in years, I didn't check the clock. Because my time was mine again. And I was done spending it on people who only saw the end of me, not the whole of me. On Tuesday, I crossed out another name, not from a calendar, from the guest list tucked in my kitchen drawer. The one I'd started years ago when I first imagined a grand celebration for my 85th birthday. I always pictured a long table in the backyard, string lights overhead, laughter rising with the scent of lemon pie. But lately, that list had begun to feel like a burden, like I was inviting people to witness something they never truly valued. His name was still there. My son. Third line from the top. I stared at it for a long while, the ink slightly smudged from the years of folding and unfolding. Then I picked up a pen, not red this time, just black and final, and I drew a line right through his name. There, clean, quiet, undramatic. I didn't cry, I didn't hesitate, because it wasn't an act of anger, it was an act of truth. He wouldn't be coming. Not really. Not the version of him I had once loved, and I had finally accepted that inviting him would not bring that boy back. The next morning, I called the bakery. "Cut the guest count by 10, I told them. "Everything okay?" the woman asked gently. "Better than okay," I replied, "just trimming the list to fit the room." But really, I was trimming the list to fit my heart. Later that day, Sarah stopped by. My granddaughter, the one who once forgot my birthday, who once rolled her eyes at my stories. But lately, she had started coming around again. No requests, no apologies, just presence. She brought me a candle she'd made herself. It smelled like vanilla and something warmer, something I couldn't name. "What's this for?" I asked. "Just because," she said, smiling. We sat on the porch, watching the mailman pass by. She asked me what I was reading and actually waited for the answer. And then she said something unexpected. "If you ever throw that big birthday party, I want to help." I looked at her, truly looked. She had my eyes, my stubborn chin, but none of his cruelty. "You'll be on the new list," I told her. She laughed. "New list?" "Yes," I said softly. This time, only people who make time feel full. And in that moment, I knew. My story wasn't closing. It was narrowing, the way all meaningful things do before they deepen. It was just past noon when I heard his voice again, not in my head, I'm not that far gone yet, but in my hallway, real, solid, confident, the voice of a man who never knocked. I froze in the middle of folding laundry. A pair of socks fell to the floor, forgotten. He was talking to someone, laughing even, like nothing had happened. I stepped into the hallway, quiet as a shadow, and saw him, my son, standing near the front door, chatting with Sarah, who had apparently let herself in like she used to when she was 10. Sarah caught my eye over his shoulder. Her face changed. "Grandma," she said quickly, "I didn't know he was coming." He just showed up. He turned, smiled, like a politician on a campaign trail. "Mom," he said, arms slightly open, "don't look so surprised." I didn't move, just looked at him. That face, so familiar, so foreign. The eyes I gave him, the smirk I did not. "I came to talk," he said, "about everything, about what I said." "Which part?" I asked calmly. "The countdown or the punchline?" His smile faltered. Sarah shifted uncomfortably. "Maybe I should give you two—" "No," I interrupted. "Stay." He looked from me to her, back to me. He wasn't used to silence being his answer. "I was joking," he said, his voice sharper now. "You always take things too personally, and you've always hidden cruelty inside a joke," I replied. He opened his mouth to speak again, but I raised my hand. "Let me be clear," I said. "You are not banned from this house, but you are no longer welcomed like before. If you come, it will be as a guest, and guests knock." He blinked, unsure how to process being corrected by someone he'd long dismissed. "And if you don't want to knock," I added, "then you don't have to come at all." Sarah reached for my hand, gently, proudly. My son exhaled sharply, as if expecting the air to carry him back to the version of me who once needed his approval. But she no longer lived here, and as he turned and walked out the door, no longer laughing, no longer in control, I picked up the socks from the floor and continued folding. Because dignity isn't loud, it just endures. That evening, after the hallway returned to its familiar quiet, I found myself drawn to the bottom drawer of my bedroom dresser, the one that stuck slightly when pulled, as if reluctant to share what it held. Inside were the photographs I never displayed. Not because they weren't beautiful, but because they belonged to a version of life that no longer fit on walls. I pulled out a worn envelope labeled "For Rainy Days." Inside, a photo of him, maybe 8 or 9 years old, sitting on the porch steps with his shoelaces untied and a dandelion in his hand. He was looking at me through the camera, a bit of mischief in his grin. I remember the moment. He'd just told me he wanted to be the boss of the whole world, and I'd said, "Start with tying your shoes." He'd laughed. I'd clicked the shutter. That photo used to bring me joy. But tonight, it brought something heavier. Not grief, exactly. Not anger. Something more complicated. The kind of ache you get when you remember how bright someone once was before life, or pride, dulled their shine. I traced the edges of the photo with my fingers. My nails aren't what they used to be, but they still remember tenderness. I didn't cry. I've done my crying. But I also didn't put the photo back. Instead, I slipped it into the back of a book I keep by my bedside. A story about a woman who learns to love herself after being invisible for decades. Not fiction, just familiar. I suppose there's a part of me that still hopes, not for an apology, not for a magical change, but for him to remember the boy in the picture. The one who held dandelions like treasures and promised to build me a house with a garden on the roof. That boy. He had love in him. Maybe some part still does. But my peace no longer depends on whether or not he finds it. I tucked the book closed and turned off the lamp. Outside, the night hummed softly like it was trying not to disturb anything, And as I closed my eyes, I didn't think about what was lost. I thought about what remained, my quiet, my home, myself, all still here, all still mine. The next morning, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror longer than usual. It's not vanity. I gave that up sometime between my second hip ache and my third pair of bifocals. But today, something made me pause. I studied my reflection, tracing the lines near my eyes, the soft sag of my jaw. People like to say, age steals your beauty. I disagree. Age reveals it, if you're brave enough to look closely. This face has laughed until it hurt, cried until it healed, spoken too soon, stayed silent too long. But most of all, this face has survived. I reached for my lipstick, the burgundy one I hadn't worn in months, years maybe. It took a moment to remember how to shape the line, but when I did, I smiled, a little crooked, a little bold. I don't dress up for anyone anymore. Not for men, not for visitors, certainly not for birthdays filled with jokes about adult diapers. I dress for myself. So that morning, I put on my favorite earrings, the ones with the turquoise beads I bought at a flea market when my husband was still alive and my knees didn't creak, and I made breakfast the way I used to, thick toast, scrambled eggs with too much butter, and real coffee in a proper mug, not one of those travel things with a lid. I sat by the window, the sunlight gently pouring in, and let myself feel beautiful. Not in the way the world defines it. Youth, smooth skin, soft voices. Number in my way. Beautiful, like an old tree with roots too deep to see. Beautiful like a quilt made of memory. Like a room that smells of cinnamon and something you can't quite name, but feels like home. That day, I didn't think of my son. I didn't wonder if he'd call or visit or regret. I didn't check the calendar on the wall. Instead, I pulled out an old photo album and began writing captions under the blank spaces. Names, dates, small stories that only I knew. Because if they're going to remember me, they'll remember the truth. Not just a woman who grew old, but a woman who outgrew the need to be anyone's punchline. And as I closed the album, I caught my reflection once more in the hallway mirror. This time, I didn't pause. I winked and walked away. It came in the mail, a creamy white envelope with gold trim and perfect cursive lettering. I nearly tossed it, thinking it was one of those luxury catalogs trying to sell me silk sheets or miracle eye cream. But when I opened it, I froze. You are cordially invited to a family dinner hosted by Michael and Claire. Michael, my son. Claire, his wife. The woman who once told me I was too traditional to be around their children unsupervised. It wasn't handwritten. It wasn't warm. It was printed like a wedding announcement, right down to the RSVP deadline. I sat at the kitchen table with the invitation in my hand and stared at the words like they might rearrange themselves into something kind. They didn't. A dinner. After months of silence. After the calendar. After being treated like a relic, too fragile or too foolish to matter. Now, a formal dinner, like nothing had happened. I flipped the card over. No note, no message, no apology. Just a time, a date, an address I already knew by heart. The most remarkable thing wasn't the invitation itself. It was what I didn't feel. No flutter in my chest, no rush of hope, not even anger. Just stillness. I made myself a cup of tea, sat down, and looked at the RSVP line. Kindly respond by... Kindly. That word used to mean something to me. When he was a boy, Michael would bring me dandelions and say, "Kindly for you, Mama." That was the child I raised. The one who used to believe kindness wasn't weakness. But somewhere along the way, he replaced it with control, with pride, with hollow gestures like this one. I placed the invitation on the table, took a long sip of my tea, and walked to the hallway drawer. The same drawer where I kept my list. The same drawer where I had tucked away my red pen. This time, I didn't cross out a name. I simply wrote, "No longer attending performances." and slipped the invitation beneath it. Let them gather. Let them toast. Let them wonder why the air feels colder this year, why something's missing at the table. Because I won't attend a dinner where I'm expected to wear my silence like jewelry. And I certainly won't RSVP to a life I've already outgrown. There's a chair by the window in my living room, old, soft, and a little sun-faded. It's not the kind you see in magazines. It sags on the left side. The cushion is worn thin, and the floral pattern has long since lost its bloom. But it's mine. I've had it since before Michael went to college, before Claire, before the calendars and the silence. It's where I read books, wrote letters, and once rocked Sarah to sleep when her mother forgot to pick her up. That chair has held my tired feet, my worried thoughts, and my morning coffee for decades. Lately, I've spent more time in it than usual, not because I'm waiting, I'm done with that, but because it's the one place in this house where I feel the most like myself. This morning, I brought out an old quilt from the closet, the one I made with my sister the year she passed. I laid it over the back of the chair and sat down with my notebook, the one with the green cover and the cracked spine. I've started writing something, not a diary, not a letter, a declaration, I suppose. Every day I write one thing I no longer feel guilty for. Today's line was simple. I do not owe anyone my presence just because we share blood. It felt bold, liberating, sharp, but true. I looked out the window as I wrote it, watching a squirrel attempt to climb the feeder again. He failed, as always, but never gave up. There was a time I believed family would always find its way back. That time has passed. But peace? That came back the moment I stopped opening my door to people who only remembered me when they needed someone to tolerate. I heard the mailman drop something at the door, but I didn't get up. Nothing out there was more urgent than what I had in my lap, my own voice finally uncensored. The wind shifted the light across the floor. The house creaked like it was exhaling. I closed the notebook and leaned back in the chair, pulling the quilt over my legs. No drama, no grand goodbye, just stillness. And the quiet, unshakable feeling that sometimes reclaiming your life doesn't look like a battle. It looks like a woman in a sagging chair, writing her own piece, one sentence at a time. It came late, almost midnight. My phone buzzed against the nightstand, and I nearly ignored it. At my age, calls that come after dark usually bring bad news. But this wasn't a call. It was a voice message from Michael. I didn't open it right away. I stared at the screen for a moment, watching the little notification sit there like a pebble in my shoe. Not painful, just something I couldn't pretend wasn't there. Eventually, curiosity won. I pressed play and held the phone near my ear, bracing myself for, I don't know what, a half apology, another offhand remark disguised as concern, a request maybe. But it was just his voice, softer than I remembered, with pauses that felt too heavy to be casual. Hey, Mom, I don't really know why I'm recording this. Maybe just, I was thinking about you, about the chair by the window, about that time I broke your vase and you made me glue it back piece by piece. Remember that? He laughed, but it wasn't joyful, just empty air trying to fill the space between us. I've been off. I know that. I've said things I shouldn't have. Maybe I thought being distant made me strong. I don't know. Just, I'm sorry, I guess. The message ended without a goodbye. I replayed it once, then again, not because I needed to hear it, but because something in his voice reminded me of the boy he used to be, the boy who built towers out of blocks just to knock them over and start again, the boy who used to check if I was watching before showing off his spelling tests. He was reaching for something, but not quite grasping it. That night, I didn't reply, not because I was angry, but because forgiveness isn't just a door you open when someone knocks once. Sometimes it's a path that has to be walked, barefoot, slowly, with every stone felt, and I wasn't sure yet if he was willing to walk it. I turned off the phone, laid it gently on the nightstand, and turned toward the window. The moon was full, casting light across my quilt. the same one I had wrapped around Sarah the night she cried into my lap about her first heartbreak. I closed my eyes and breathed in the quiet. A message had come, but my peace had never left. I never liked grocery shopping on weekends. Too many carts bumping into one another, too many loud conversations over frozen peas. But that Saturday, I needed oranges, and I didn't feel like waiting. I walked slowly, letting others pass. My list was short. Fresh fruit, tea, bread, and those lemon cookies I pretend I buy for the neighbors' kids. Halfway through the produce aisle, I heard my name. Mom? I turned slowly. Michael stood near the avocados holding a bunch of bananas, looking like he hadn't slept in days. He didn't move toward me, just waited, like a child waiting to see if the principal would speak first. I nodded. Michael. His mouth twitched, almost like he was about to smile, but it faded quickly. You're looking well. I am well. We stood there for a moment, the buzz of shopping carts and distant intercom announcements humming behind our silence. I listened to your message, I said finally. His eyes flickered. Yeah? I wasn't sure if you would. I did. He seemed to be holding his breath. I reached into my cart and picked up a bag of oranges. You know, when you were little, you refused to eat these unless I peeled them for you. He chuckled lightly. They were messy. You were messy, I said, with the faintest trace of warmth. He nodded, looking down. Still am, I guess. A pause. I meant what I said, he added. I know it's not enough. I looked at him. Really looked. Older than I remembered. Not just in the face, but in the way he stood. Something had softened, or maybe just cracked. I'm not angry, Michael, I said gently. I've simply chosen peace. Does peace mean no room for me? He asked quietly. No, I replied. But it does mean the door stays locked unless you knock with respect, and you stay only if you don't bring the storm inside. He nodded slowly, as if understanding the terms of a contract he'd long ignored. Would it be all right if I called you sometime? That depends, I said. Will it be a call or another performance? He met my eyes. A call. I reached into my cart again, grabbed the lemon cookies, and handed them to him. For Sarah, I said. He held the box like it was breakable, and I walked away, my cart lighter than before. Not because of the groceries, but because I had finally stopped carrying his guilt for him. It arrived in a plain white envelope, tucked between a water bill and a flyer for discounted lawn chairs. No return address, just my name, written in Michael's unmistakable handwriting. My birthday wasn't for another week. I stood at the kitchen counter, the envelope in my hand, unsure whether to open it now or pretend I hadn't seen it at all. Old instincts whispered caution, but I was tired of being afraid of paper. I slid my finger along the seal and pulled out the card. It was simple. No glitter, no joke. Just a watercolor of a cottage with ivy on the door and soft light in the windows. It looked like the house I always dreamed of retiring in, before I realized I'd already built my home in myself. Inside, his message was short. I used to think birthdays were about celebrating the person you used to be, but maybe they're about honoring the person who survived becoming who you are now. Happy early birthday, Mom. I'm still learning. Michael. I read it once, then again. He didn't mention the past, didn't ask for anything. He wasn't asking to be forgiven, only to be seen. I placed the card on the counter and made myself a cup of tea. As the water boiled, I thought about all the birthday cards I'd received over the years, the loud ones, the sarcastic ones, the ones signed by secretaries or spouses. This one was different. It wasn't a gesture. It was a step. That evening, I placed the card on my windowsill, beside the little cactus Sarah gave me last spring. I didn't text him, didn't call, but I didn't throw the card away either. The truth is, I don't know what comes next. Healing doesn't have a script. It stutters and stalls. It writes in pencil, not ink. But I do know this. For the first time in years, my birthday won't just be a mark of aging. It'll be a quiet declaration that I am still here, still whole, still mine. And if my son is trying, really trying, then maybe this year the gift isn't forgiveness. Maybe it's boundaries and the hope that love, when stripped of entitlement, might grow back differently, stronger, quieter, truer. So I sipped my tea and let the soft light of the card's cottage warm the edge of the windowsill. Just enough. Sunday dinners used to be sacred. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans with too much butter, all laid out on the table I'd polished myself every Saturday night. The plates didn't match, and the silverware was older than most of my grandchildren, but it didn't matter. What mattered was the sound. Forks tapping, voices rising, laughter folding into the creaks of this old house. But over time, the table grew quieter. The seats filled less often. People got busy. Priorities shifted. And eventually, it was just me. Still, I kept setting the table. Habit, maybe. Hope, perhaps. That evening, I made a smaller version of my usual Sunday meal. 1 chicken breast, just enough potatoes for 2 helpings, and green beans because tradition still held a grip on me. I set 2 places, out of muscle memory more than expectation, and sat down to eat. The second chair stayed empty. Halfway through my meal, I caught myself glancing at it, as if someone might walk in late, mumble an apology, and slide into the seat with a tired smile. But no one did, and yet I didn't feel alone. Across from me was the card, the birthday card. I'd propped it up against the salt shaker as if it were a guest of its own, a fragile symbol of something not yet broken. I chewed slowly, thoughtfully, letting the silence speak instead of fearing it. Maybe this is what healing looks like. A seat that remains empty, not out of loss, but out of choice. A meal cooked for one that still feels like an offering. I didn't cry. I didn't toast the past. I didn't beg the silence to end. Instead, I finished my meal, cleared the plates, and washed the dishes under soft yellow light. Afterward, I took the card, walked to the guest room, the one no one uses anymore, and placed it on the bedside table. Maybe someday someone would earn the right to sit across from me again. Not because I needed company, but because they'd learned how to value it. Until then, the chair would stay exactly where it was. A quiet reminder that some spaces, once mistreated, don't get filled again easily, and that sometimes strength doesn't roar across a dinner table. It sits still, with a fork in one hand and dignity in the other. It was hidden in the back of my closet, inside an old shoebox wrapped in tissue paper that had yellowed at the edges. I hadn't touched it in years. Maybe I'd even forgotten it was there, until that morning when I was looking for something else and my fingers brushed against the box. I carried it carefully to the bed and peeled back the lid like I was opening a secret I'd kept from myself. Inside was the sweater, light blue, hand-knit, with buttons shaped like tiny oak leaves. I'd started it one winter, the year Michael first told me he and Claire were expecting. I remember sitting by the fireplace, counting stitches, and picturing the way my grandchild might look wrapped in it. Sarah was born in the spring, but by then things had changed. Claire had made it clear. They wanted their baby raised a certain way, without old-fashioned influence. That meant no homemade clothes, no nursery rhymes, no lullabies sung in a voice shaped by years and wisdom. The sweater stayed in the box. I never gave it to Sarah. I told myself she wouldn't need it, that babies grow fast and that perhaps I'd made the sleeves too long. But really, I was hurt. Not in a loud, dramatic way, just a quiet ache that settled into my chest like dust. Now, holding the sweater again, I felt something shift. I ran my hands over the stitches, remembering each loop, each row. The care I poured into it wasn't wasted. It had just been waiting, like me. That afternoon, I went to the living room, pulled out a sheet of thick stationery, and wrote a note in ink. Dear Sarah, I made this for you before you were born. It's never been worn, but it carries every ounce of the love I felt when I first knew you were coming into this world. If you've outgrown it, that's all right. Some gifts aren't meant for size. They're meant for remembering. Love, Grandma. I folded the sweater carefully, tucked the note inside, and wrapped it in brown paper. I didn't mail it that day. I didn't even write the address. But I left it by the door, because maybe the gift I never gave still has a place. And maybe, just maybe, when someone finally knocks again, I'll be ready to open more than the door. It was a quiet Tuesday, the kind where nothing urgent exists, and the ticking of the clock feels louder than the outside world. I had just settled into my chair by the window with a cup of chamomile when I heard it. 3 soft knocks. Not the kind of knock that demanded, not the kind that barged in with arrogance or assumption, just gentle, like someone hoping, not expecting. I stood slowly, my knees reminding me of the years they carried. I opened the door without looking through the peephole, maybe because I already knew. There she stood. Sarah, not the child who used to draw on my kitchen walls with crayons, not the awkward teenager who rolled her eyes at my stories, but a young woman, taller than I remembered, wearing a simple coat and holding something wrapped in brown paper. It took me a moment to speak. "Hello, sweetheart." Her eyes filled instantly. "Hi, Grandma." We stood there for a heartbeat too long, neither of us knowing what to do next. Then she held out the package. "I found this on my birthday. Mom said you left it last year, but it got lost in storage. I read the note. I glanced down and saw the edges of the paper curling gently in her grip. The sweater. My words. "I didn't know if I should come," she said, her voice trembling. "But I wanted to." I stepped aside. "You're here now." She entered slowly, her gaze sweeping over the house as if trying to remember every corner, or maybe realizing she never really knew it to begin with. We sat in silence for a while. No apologies, no explanations, just a shared stillness. She pulled the sweater from the wrapping and laid it in her lap. "I know I've outgrown it," she whispered. I smiled gently. "Some things aren't meant to be worn, just held." Her fingers traced the stitches, and I watched her carefully, not for blame, but for bridges. "I've missed you," she said finally. I didn't say it back. I didn't have to, because in that moment, with my teacup growing cold and the weight of years pressing gently around us, I realized this wasn't a reunion. It was a beginning. And sometimes forgiveness doesn't arrive as a grand speech or dramatic tear. Sometimes it walks through the door quietly with old sweaters, shaking hands, and a heart ready to listen. The house was quieter than usual that morning, though the air felt warmer. Sarah had stayed the night, not because she needed to, but because she asked to. That made all the difference. She moved carefully through the kitchen, opening cabinets like they might have changed since she was little. I watched her from the dining table as she made 2 cups of tea, just the way I liked it, with honey, no sugar. We sat together, not saying much. Comfort had returned between us, like an old friend who didn't need to knock anymore. Then, halfway through her second sip, she asked, "Grandma, were you ever angry at me?" The question hung in the air like steam from the cup. I set mine down slowly. "Angry?" I repeated, not to stall, but to feel the word in my mouth. "No, sweetheart, not angry, just hurt." Her eyes dropped. "Because of how we left things. Because I didn't visit. Because I laughed when I shouldn't have." I took her hand across the table. "You were young. You were following the voices around you. And sometimes, love whispered while pride shouted. I understand that now more than I did back then." She nodded, but the guilt still clung to her. "I thought you'd stopped loving me," she said. My grip on her hand tightened just slightly. "Oh, Sarah. Love doesn't stop, but sometimes it goes quiet so we can protect ourselves." She blinked quickly, trying not to cry. "I wish I'd come sooner." "You came when you were ready," I said, "and not a day too late." We sat like that for a long time, hands linked, hearts mending. Later, as I washed the cups and she dried them, she asked another question, softer this time. Would it be all right if I came again next week? I smiled. Next week, next month, whenever your heart calls you back. And just like that, something shifted. Not the earth, not the sky, but the space between us, once filled with silence, now held the promise of time. Because sometimes healing doesn't come through grand gestures or perfect words. Sometimes it begins with a single question, spoken in a quiet kitchen, over warm tea, by someone finally brave enough to ask. It had been years since I climbed into the attic. The wooden ladder creaked beneath my weight, the air thick with dust and forgotten summers. A single beam of light slipped through the tiny window, casting soft shadows across the boxes, stacked like old memories no one dared to disturb. Sarah followed behind me, careful not to step on the weak spots in the floorboards. "Are you sure you want to be up here?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded. "I think it's time." I knew exactly which box I was looking for. It sat in the far corner, behind faded suitcases and brittle Christmas wreaths. I had labeled it once in red marker, Michael, childhood. The letters had faded, but I remembered. We carried it down together, setting it gently on the living room floor like a relic from another life. I opened the lid slowly, lifting out the pieces one by one. A small toy truck with a chipped wheel, his elementary school yearbook, a drawing of our house with smoke curling from the chimney and my name written in block letters beneath it. Sarah watched quietly as I handed her a photo of her father at 7. All freckles and missing teeth. "He used to hide under the porch during thunderstorms," I said with a soft smile. "Said it was the only place the sky couldn't find him." She laughed gently. "I never knew that." "There's a lot you didn't know, and maybe that's partly my fault." She reached into the box and pulled out a wrinkled envelope. "What's this?" I hesitated. "A letter, one I wrote but never sent." "To him?" I nodded. "Do you want me to read it?" I thought for a long moment. Then I shook my head. "Not yet, but maybe someday." We packed the items back in slowly with more care than before. This time they weren't just things. They were fragments of who we'd been and who we might still become. Before Sarah left that evening, she stopped by the door, one hand on the knob. "Grandma," she said, "do you think Dad will ever come around?" I looked toward the attic, then back at her. "I don't know, but I've finally learned that waiting doesn't mean pausing your life. It means living fully, just in case someone decides to catch up." She smiled, kissed my cheek, and walked into the evening. And I stood in the quiet, holding an old photo, no longer aching for what was lost, but grateful for what had finally come home. It was raining the day he called, not a storm, just a soft, steady drizzle that blurred the windows and made the world feel slower, quieter. I was folding laundry in the living room, a cup of tea cooling beside me, when the phone rang. I almost didn't answer, but something, intuition maybe, told me I should. "Hello?" There was a pause. Then, "Mom?" His voice was hoarse, lower than I remembered, like he'd been rehearsing the word for hours. "It's Michael." I didn't say anything at first. I just listened to the rhythm of his breathing, measured and cautious. "I don't really know what to say," he admitted. I thought maybe I'd missed the window, but Sarah told me you might still pick up." Still pick up, as if my love had an expiration date. I sat down slowly, the laundry forgotten. "I'm here." He let out a breath. Not relief, but something closer to release. "I've been thinking about that day," he said. "The calendar. The words I said to you. I don't even know why I did it. I thought I was being funny. Or clever. But really, I was just angry. At myself. At time. At watching you grow older when I didn't want to face what that meant." I closed my eyes, the memory pressing against my chest like a bruise. I was cruel, he continued, "and you didn't deserve that." "No," I said quietly. "I didn't." Another pause. "I want to do better," he said. "I don't know how, but I want to try, if you'll let me." I looked out the window. The rain hadn't stopped, but the clouds had shifted. Just a little. Enough to let in light. "I'm not the same woman you last saw, Michael," I said. "I've learned how to protect my peace, and I won't trade it for empty promises." "I understand. But," I added gently, "I believe in beginnings. Not second chances, just new ones, if you're willing to start there." "I am," he whispered. We didn't talk much after that. Just enough. Just what mattered. When the call ended, I sat in the stillness for a long time, hands resting on my lap, heart steady. It had taken years, but sometimes the right words arrive when no one is performing, when there's no one else to impress. Just a son, a mother, and the truth between them. It appeared one morning, without warning, resting neatly on the mantel above the fireplace, a white envelope, my name written in careful, blocky letters. No stamp, no return address, just placed there, deliberately. At first, I thought Sarah had left it. She'd stopped by the evening before, bringing cinnamon rolls and a book she insisted I read. But when I called to ask, she said no. That left only one possibility: Michael. My hands trembled slightly as I picked it up. The paper was thick, like something used for wedding invitations or legal documents. I took a breath and opened it. Inside was a single page, folded twice. The handwriting was his, older, steadier than it used to be, as if he'd written every word with intention. "Mom, I've thought a lot about what matters, about the things I should have said, the times I should have stayed. This envelope doesn't hold an apology. It holds something more. I've spoken to the family. I've made changes. And I've asked the lawyer to amend what needed amending. You're no longer an afterthought. You're at the center, where you've always belonged. Thank you for teaching me that silence is not weakness, that kindness is not submission, and that love, real love, doesn't demand attention. It just waits. With all my heart, Michael." I read it 3 times before I sat down. Not because I didn't believe it, but because I did. I looked at the fireplace. Above it, an old photo of us stood in its usual place, me holding Michael when he was a boy, both of us grinning through the summer sun. For years, that photo had felt like a lie, a frozen moment that didn't match the years that followed. But now, it looked different. It looked like a beginning we hadn't ruined, just misplaced. The envelope, still warm from my hands, sat beside the frame. And I knew this wasn't a transaction. It wasn't guilt. It was the first time in years he'd offered me something without expecting anything in return. Respect, recognition, a place not out of obligation, but choice. And in the quiet that followed, I allowed myself something I hadn't felt in a long time: pride. Not in him, but in myself, for surviving long enough to finally be seen. It was early morning when I stepped outside, the sky still painted in pale lavender and gold. The birds hadn't yet begun their chorus, and the world felt suspended in that perfect silence only dawn can offer. I carried a small wooden box in my hands, one I hadn't opened in over a decade. It had no lock, no label, just smooth edges worn by time and corners softened by years of being moved but never truly unpacked. I set it gently on the porch bench and sat beside it. This wasn't a gesture for anyone but me. Inside were fragments of a life I had tucked away. A crumpled drawing of me with stick legs and wild gray hair labeled "My Grandma the Queen." A thank you card from Sarah for teaching her how to braid, misspelled and signed with hearts. A recipe for lemon pie written in my mother's hand, the ink smudged by decades of floury fingers. At the bottom lay an old photograph. Me and Michael, taken at a summer fair. He must have been 10. We were mid-laugh, ice cream melting down our hands. For a long time, I couldn't look at that photo without bitterness, but now it felt different. Not sweet, not painful, just real. I picked it up, held it to my chest, and let myself sit in memory, not to ache, just to remember. Eventually, I placed everything back inside, closed the lid, and tied a ribbon around it, the same blue one Sarah had once used to wrap her birthday gift to me when she was little. Then I did something that surprised even myself. I left the box on the porch, not hidden, not locked, just waiting, because I didn't know who would find it. Maybe Sarah, maybe Michael, maybe no one. But it didn't matter. What mattered was that I wasn't carrying it anymore. The weight of all those years, the ache, the silence, the longing, was no longer mine to hold alone. Sometimes healing isn't about the grand declarations. It's about the quiet release, the choice to stop hiding the pieces of yourself and to say without fear, "This is who I am. This is what I've lived. This is what remains." And if someone chooses to sit beside you and open the box, so be it. If not, at least you've cleared a space for something new to arrive. It was early morning when I stepped outside, the sky still painted in pale lavender and gold. The birds hadn't yet begun their chorus, and the world felt suspended in that perfect silence only dawn can offer. I carried a small wooden box in my hands, one I hadn't opened in over a decade. It had no lock, no label, just smooth edges worn by time and corners softened by years of being moved but never truly unpacked. I set it gently on the porch bench and sat beside it. This wasn't a gesture for anyone but me. Inside were fragments of a life I had tucked away. A crumpled drawing of me with stick legs and wild gray hair labeled "My Grandma the Queen," a thank you card from Sarah for teaching her how to braid, misspelled and signed with hearts, a recipe for lemon pie written in my mother's hand, the ink smudged by decades of floury fingers. At the bottom lay an old photograph, me and Michael, taken at a summer fair. He must have been 10. We were mid-laugh, ice cream melting down our hands. For a long time, I couldn't look at that photo without bitterness. But now it felt different. Not sweet, not painful, just real. I picked it up, held it to my chest, and let myself sit in memory, not to ache, just to remember. Eventually, I placed everything back inside, closed the lid, and tied a ribbon around it. The same blue one Sarah had once used to wrap her birthday gift to me when she was little. Then I did something that surprised even myself. I left the box on the porch, not hidden, not locked, just waiting, because I didn't know who would find it. Maybe Sarah, maybe Michael, maybe no one. But it didn't matter. What mattered was that I wasn't carrying it anymore. The weight of all those years, the ache, the silence, the longing, was no longer mine to hold alone. Sometimes healing isn't about the grand declarations. It's about the quiet release, the choice to stop hiding the pieces of yourself and to say, without fear, "This is who I am. This is what I've lived. This is what remains." And if someone chooses to sit beside you and open the box, so be it. If not, at least you've cleared a space for something new to arrive. It had taken me a lifetime to understand that not all gifts come wrapped in ribbons. Some are wrapped in silence, in time, in resilience. On the morning of my birthday, 1 year after the podgy package of adult diapers and laughter, I woke to find the house quiet, sun filtering through the curtains, and a sense of calm that didn't need company to feel complete. There was a knock at the door. I opened it to find Sarah holding a small paper bag. Her smile was soft, unsure, the kind of smile that still waited for permission. "I know you don't like surprises," she said, "but this one, it's quiet." I let her in. She placed the bag on the table and pulled out a single object, a journal, not new, worn, filled. "I've been writing in it since last year," she said. "Every week, memories, regrets, hopes, things I never told you because I didn't know how." I ran my hand over the cover. The leather was soft, the pages bent at the corners. Lived in, not performative. I didn't come to ask for forgiveness, she added. I came to say thank you for still being here, for letting me find my way back. I couldn't speak. My throat tightened. She reached into the bag once more and handed me something else, a folded envelope, the same kind I'd once left for her. Inside was a single sentence, handwritten. The gift I needed was always you. We sat down at the table together. No cake, no candles, just two women, one older, one grown, finally understanding that love isn't about presents. It's about return. Later that evening, after she left, I placed the journal beside my bed. I didn't read it right away. Some gifts deserve stillness. Some gifts are not for immediate joy, but for slow unfolding. Like forgiveness, like healing, like finally choosing yourself after years of being last. And as I turned out the light and rested my hand on the cover, I realized this birthday didn't need laughter. It didn't need an audience. It didn't even need a celebration. Because I already had what mattered, the quiet, the truth, the final gift. Peace. It was a Tuesday afternoon, the kind where the sun looks lazy and the wind feels like an old friend drifting through the curtains. I had just settled down with a book and a slice of lemon pie when I heard the sound of gravel crunching outside. Not hurried, not heavy, just familiar. I opened the door, and there he was. Michael. Not on the phone this time, not through a letter or an envelope, in person. He stood there awkwardly, holding a small potted plant, a fig tree of all things, and looking like he wasn't sure if I would slam the door or smile. I did neither. I just stepped aside. "Hi, Mom," he said. "Come in," I replied, my voice softer than I expected. We sat in the living room across from each other like two people who once shared a whole lifetime and then forgot how to be in the same room. The silence wasn't cold. It was cautious. "I didn't come to talk about the past," he said after a while. "I came because I realized I'd been trying to fix things through words, but maybe I just needed to show up." He placed the fig tree on the table. "It's young," he added, "but it'll grow, if you let it." There was something in his voice that wasn't there before. Not desperation, not shame, hope. He looked around the room, letting his eyes land on the old photos, the books, the quiet life I'd built without waiting for anyone's permission. "I missed a lot," he said. "Yes," I answered honestly, "but I'd like to be here now." I nodded. Not because I had fully forgiven, not because everything was mended, but because people don't always return in the way we imagine. Sometimes they just show up with a plant in their hand and an apology in their eyes. That evening, after he left, I sat beside the small fig tree. It didn't bloom yet, it didn't bear fruit, but it had roots, and sometimes that's where you start. The fig tree sat quietly by the window now, reaching toward the sun a little more each day. It hadn't grown much, not visibly, but I noticed the way its leaves turned, always searching for the light. In a way, so was I. The house felt different lately, not louder, not busier, just fuller, as if time itself had softened in the corners, finally making room for what I thought I'd lost. Sarah visited every weekend now. Sometimes she brought cookies, sometimes a story from her week. Sometimes she just sat with me, her head resting on my shoulder like when she was small. And Michael? He didn't call every day. He didn't need to. But every once in a while he stopped by. Not with speeches, just with presence. He helped me fix the leaky faucet, changed the porch light. He planted herbs in the little patch of soil I used to call a garden. He even brought over a second chair, matching mine, and placed it beside it on the porch without a word. The first time he sat in it, we didn't speak. We just rocked in silence, the creak of the chairs in rhythm with the wind. And I thought, this is what healing looks like. Not grand, not loud, just two chairs, finally filled. I still kept the photograph on the table. and Sarah's journal, and the letter, not to revisit the pain, but to remind myself how far we'd come. One night, Sarah asked, "Grandma, do you wish it had all happened differently?" I looked around my quiet, warm home, at the fig tree, the books, the photographs, the empty teacups, at the chair beside mine, no longer waiting. "I used to," I said, "but then I realized if it hadn't happened the way it did, maybe I wouldn't have found my voice. Maybe I wouldn't have learned how to live for myself." She nodded, and that was enough. As I sat that night, the moonlight casting soft shadows across the floor, I understood. They hadn't saved me. I had saved myself. And now I simply chose to share that peace with those who were finally ready to sit beside me, not because they deserved it, not because I needed them, but because there is power in surviving and still choosing to love.